This week, I read All right, so my first review for this week is I listened to Spare by Prince Harry. Anytime that an author reads their own audiobook, that is a direction that I take for reading it. Really quickly, like within the first 10 minutes, I was blown away by the writing. And I thought, wow, this guy is a tremendous writer, which is something that I was not expecting. Probably by about 30 minutes in or though, so I started to question if he had a ghostwriter. So I Googled and I found that yes, he did. And I can't say exactly what made me feel that he had a ghostwriter, but I do think that there are portions of the book, such as his time in Afghanistan, the birth of his two children, where it feels very true to his voice, feels like the way I've heard him speak in interviews, the way I heard him in the Netflix documentary. And then there are other areas, particularly when he's talking about physical spaces of the monarchy, Balmoral Castle, Sandringham, Kensington Palace, where it feels just much more literary, where the language is flowery, it's descriptive, and this just didn't really feel like the voice that I was used to hearing from him. I've thought about it and I can't decide if this is a conscious choice he made in his book to make his personal experiences, things that are unique to his own identity, really come through in his own voice, or if this is just he utilized a ghostwriter more in the spaces where he was talking about the monarchy and his family. I also noticed that he really got his dates right. Like he's talking about where he was in spring break in like 1997, and he knows like the exact date that he's on spring break. And I know I'm the same age as him, and I know there's no way I would remember like the exact day of some of these events happening. So I think the ghostwriter may have also kind of aided in that, which at times made it feel less like someone telling their own story and made it feel more like a biography written about someone else. So I think the ghostwriter for me made it a little bit harder for me to connect to him in some areas of what he was saying. This book is divided into 3 parts, each of roughly equal length. The first starts in his childhood, shortly before the death of his mother, Princess Diana, and then goes until his time in the army. The second part of the book starts and really covers through his time in the army up until just before he meets Meghan Markle. And the third section of the book starts right when he meets Meghan Markle, starts right with him scrolling through Instagram and meeting her. And then the third part ends in September of 2022. I really struggled to get through the first part of the book, so the first 5 hours of listening. It felt like something out of time. Harry is describing being at boarding school, how while he was there, women that he refers to as matrons used to wash his hair for him in these like old style bathtubs. He talks about going to friends' estates where they set up these elaborate war games where they're escalating violence against each other and finding the means of committing the most bodily harm. And these moments that are being described, along with the use of the ghostwriter, feel just so literary and flowery, and it really felt like the beginning of a Wes Anderson movie, something better suited to screen than to page. And it made it hard for me to connect to there being an actual real person behind the words that were spoken in this first part of the book. The second and third parts of the book were really picked up for me though. Hearing his description of his time in Afghanistan, just his entire experience with the military, really establishing himself as his own person, looking for a partner, his desire to start his own family is really compelling. And he's also providing insights into the way that he was feeling at the time, time, and also how he reflects on those experiences in the present, now that he's had additional lived experiences as well. I don't think there's going to be much new for some readers. I've never really considered myself like a serious royal watcher. I mean, I did watch the Netflix documentary of Harry and Meghan, but for the most part, I've never been glued to the press about them. And yet there were a lot of scenes in this book where I immediately said, oh yeah, I know what happens next. And I think that's really more a testament to how immensely Prince Harry has been covered in the press all of his life. For example, he's telling a story about being in Las Vegas, and he's describing the hotel suite that he and his friends are staying at. And I had kind of that feeling that you get in a horror movie where you're like, don't open the door. Or I just wanted to yell to my car audio, no, you have to leave. This is not going to end well for you. Because I knew immediately upon his describing what was the hotel looked like, what was going to happen next. So this book is not intended to be a massive tell-all, but it really does allow the readers to understand his own perspective on these events that have been broadcast across the world. One of the things that really struck me while reading this was how frustrated Harry has been throughout his life at not being allowed to set the record straight, not being allowed to tell his own side of the story. The royal family's motto of never complain, never explain left him feeling out of control of his own life. There's a part that just really sticks with me where he's talking about something that the press published and how mad he was that, how dare they tell this story, and he is doing all that he can to get it kind of squashed. And then a couple sentences later, he's like, well, yeah, and it was also kind of true. And I think that's just something, that not many of us experience, right? And that we get to be in control of our own stories. When something happens to us, we get to be the one who tells it, and we get to shape the narrative of that. And he's never had that opportunity from the day he was born, when he's presented outside the hospital, all the way up to the present. There's been this kind of pull of his autonomy away from him in the narrative of his own life. I know that Harry has received criticism for asking the press to provide his wife and his family with privacy, and then he turns around and he writes this book, and there's a sense that that's hypocritical. How dare he ask for privacy while also, writing this book about himself? And I think these are two very different things. He's clear in the book how much he wants to be in control of his own story, and there's a major difference between paparazzi circling your house in a helicopter to the point where you can't even go in your own backyard without having a photograph taken of you, to being thoughtful and writing a book, revealing however much you're comfortable revealing. And so therefore, I think that this is not so much his, desire to not have anyone ever know anything about him, but just for him to be in control of the narrative of his own life. I think it's also very, very clear to me in the book just how much Harry loves his family and his country. And yet he realizes that the press have made it intolerable for him to be able to stay in the UK. And he's really been neglected by his family, which is a form of abuse. His father and his brother, they are well aware of the issues with the press and the toll it has taken on Harry and on Meghan, but they've been unwilling to make the necessary changes, even at times playing along with the press when it suits them. He talks about, Charles and Camilla feeding stories to the press. He talks about being encouraged to just play along and just do what the press wants him to do. And he's telling them again and again, this isn't working, things are getting worse. And they refuse to step up for him. They make it out to be that they have no power, but Harry highlights that they do, and they've made a conscious choice not to defend him and not to stick up for him. Additionally, his family has a lot of other issues as well. It's cold. It's clear they're very cold. There's, not a lot of warmth in this family. And he describes several scenes of Prince William physically attacking him just within the last few years, demonstrating that William has his own anger issues, which makes discussions with him difficult. Harry also demonstrates how many of the issues that William and Kate have with Meghan are cultural. He tells a story about how Meghan refers to Kate having baby brain just after the birth of one of her children, and Meghan being very, very upset by this. Talking to women who've just had a baby about baby brain is kind of a normal thing in the United States. At least I've heard lots of, my friends talk about that with each other. And yet Kate was very offended that Meghan would mention her hormones. She didn't think that that was appropriate. And Harry points out that, there is this assimilation process that Meghan needs to go through, and that William and Kate could have been there for that. They could have supported her, but instead they chose to ostracize her, which really hindered her ability to assimilate, her ability to be the royal that they needed her to be. So in many respects, his family failed them time and time again. It wasn't just one opportunity and then he said, that's it, we're leaving. It was again and again and again that he went to his family and they neglected to be there for him. So I think you should read this too, for sure, if you're interested in the British royal family. As I already mentioned, there's no new juicy secrets here. However, I think you'll really enjoy hearing some of the small stories that rarely get told, some of those inside peeks that are just kind of daily life, but aren't things that we ever had insight to before. Furthermore, I think you should read this too if you enjoy reading about people who've had to make tough decisions and re-alter the plan they had for their life. Harry thought that the life that he was going to have was a life that had been laid out from him since birth. And when he realized that plan was no longer working for him, he had to completely re-envision his life and figure out a plan to make that happen. Next up, having never watched iCarly or Sam and Cat, I initially dismissed Jeannette McCurdy's book, I'm Glad My Mom Died, as something I wouldn't be interested in due to lack of context of McCurdy as an actress. However, people kept recommending the book to me, and seeing the immensely positive reviews, I decided to listen to the audiobook. McCurdy's style is authentic, it's straightforward. While her choice of title may be polarizing, I'm inclined to feel it's representative of the complex relationship she has with her mother. McCurdy illustrates herself as an obedient and agreeable child, determined to do whatever steps necessary to please her mother, who in turn engages in physical and emotional abuse of McCurdy. For me, this is what made the book so compelling. McCurdy simultaneously demonstrates the extreme abuse her mom put her through, while also highlighting that she did anything and everything that she could for her mother. And I think in this, she provides a stark portrayal of how abuse functions. She demonstrates that how her mother managed to convince her that everything she was doing for her benefit. McCurdy's style in this book felt very original to me, as she details events as she saw them at the time with very little to no commentary. Rather than processing her pain as part of her writing, McCurdy is providing snippets of her life and leaves it up to the reader to determine the impact of these events on who she ends up being. At one point, McCurdy is describing what is clearly sexual abuse in a straightforward manner without commentary. As a reader, I was wondering, does she know this is abuse? When will she realize what is happening? As McCurdy provides an unfiltered look at her eating disorders and addiction, it's evident that abuse has taken a toll on her. But even when she names the abuse she experienced, it's through the storytelling of other people informing her, rather than her coming to the conclusion herself, or even her being able to acknowledge in the present what she probably is able to, on some level, understand, that her mother was abusing her. McCurdy's writing was incredibly captivating to me. I was drawn into the story of her life, and I wanted to know what unfolded next. She covers heavy topics, but also didn't leave me feeling sad for her. Instead, I was impressed by her resolve, her determination. McCurdy provides a provoking portrayal of how fame and financial security does not free us from life's problems. You should definitely read this too if you enjoy memoirs, even if you're unfamiliar with McCurdy. In fact, at one point she makes it very clear in the book that she never wanted to be an actress. That was her mom's dream for her. Instead, she wanted to be a writer. You should also read this too if you like reading books where people demonstrate their resilience. McCurdy experienced a lot in just the first part of her life, yet she shows her drive to figure out how to make things better. I would say you should ensure you're in a good mental space before reading this book. Trigger warnings include sexual and emotional abuse, financial abuse, eating disorders, alcoholism. While I don't think that McCurdy in any way was sensationalizing her description and her experiences of these things, she is completely honest and unashamed in her writing. Overall, this book it's incredibly clear why it sold out everywhere after its initial release and why it continues to maintain popularity.